Hello and welcome to News Centre with me, Parikshit Luthra. All eyes on the crucial meeting of G20 leaders in Bali. The summit is taking place in the backdrop of the Ukraine-Russia war, and economic recovery, food and energy security will be a priority during talks. There is also a big question mark on whether there will be a consensus on the G20 declaration. Let's tell you more about the 17th G20 summit. It will be taking place in Bali from the 15th and 16th of November. The theme this time is Recover Together, Recover Stronger. G20 nations, remember, represent 85% of global GDP, 75% of global trade. What are the priorities for the G20 this time? Global health architecture, digital transformation and energy transition will be among the key discussion areas. The summit will be taking place in the backdrop of the war in Ukraine, and world leaders will be discussing the uneven economic recovery. Tensions between the West and China will also cast a shadow over the summit. As a symbol of G20's commitment to climate action, leaders will also visit a mangrove forest in Bali on the 16th of November. Key world leaders will be in attendance, including Joe Biden, Xi Jinping, Emmanuel Macron, Rishi Sunak, Narendra Modi, Olaf Scholz, Giorgia Meloni of Italy, Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. There will be no showdown between the G20 leaders and Russia, as Putin has decided to skip the meeting. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov will be attending the summit in place of President Putin. So what is on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's agenda during this meeting? Well, the Prime Minister will spend a packed 24 hours in Bali. He will be attending sessions on food and energy, digital transformation and health. He will have at least 8 bilateral meetings, including with Rishi Sunak, Emmanuel Macron, Joko Widodo. Others are being worked out right now. He will be addressing the Indian community in Bali on the 15th. This G20 is special for India as Indonesia hands over the G20 presidency to India on the 16th of November after the closing ceremony. The G20 summit is expected to end with the Bali declaration. A joint communique is looking unlikely this time as G20 operates by consensus, and tensions over Ukraine-Russia war have led to differences over the text of the joint communication. At least 10 of the G20 leaders want to sharply criticize Russia, and even a traditional photo of G20 leaders may be off the table this time around. In fact, US President Joe Biden met his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping in Bali on the sidelines of the G20 summit. This is the first in-person meeting between the two leaders since Biden took office as the President of the United States in January 2021. CNBC's Kyla Tosh is here with more on this meeting between the two leaders. And I caught up with UK High Commissioner to India, Alexander Ellis, began by asking him what the UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is urging leaders to do after Glasgow. The COP27 summit and the G20 in Bali are taking place in the backdrop of the Ukraine-Russia war and also tensions between the West and China. What is UK's new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak's agenda at COP27 and G20 going to be? And what can we expect from the meeting between Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Prime Minister Narendra Modi? With us today is UK High Commissioner to India, Alex Ellis. High Commissioner Ellis, thank you very much for joining us. After Glasgow, what is the big message that the UK Prime Minister is delivering at Glasgow, and what is he urging world leaders to do?
So we know there's a huge problem, climate change. We know that India is going to be the countries in the world most affected by climate change, most at risk, in the top 10 in the world. We know that we have to take collective action to deal with this problem. And India and the UK have to be at the forefront of that. So Prime Minister Rishi Sunak at Sharm el-Sheikh is saying, we, the UK, will stand by our financial commitments because we need to support countries like India going through their climate transition, and we all have to have ambition. We are reducing our emissions by 68% by 2030. We're really almost at 50%. At the same time, we've all got to grow. And India needs to grow. It's got this wonderful growth opportunity in the next generation. How can it do that in a sustainable way? Because now India is the third largest, will be the second largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, per capita very low. So how do we work together to ensure sustainable growth and keep the increase in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees? That's the Glasgow message, which is going to be implemented at Sharm.
Right. I'd also like to ask you about climate investments into India. Last year, we had heard of substantial investments made by the then UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson. tell us how UK is now going to build on that? Will there be some fresh investments announced?
There already are. We had the other week an announcement that Mahindra is going to partner with the sort of private equity arm of the British government, or private investment arm of the British government, BII, to invest in new electric vehicles. The investment goes both ways, of course. You also have the Ambani Group investing in a UK solar manufacturer with some very successful technology. So it goes in both directions. There needs to be support from the British government as well. That can be done through investments, for example, through BII. It can be done through investments through funds which we invest in. For example, there's a Green Growth Equity Fund, which is jointly Indian and British government supported, which is investing, for example, in a great waste-to-energy plant in Punjab. It can be done through supporting the World Bank. We've provided a guarantee of about $1 billion for World Bank funding. But in the end, private investment is what's going to drive it. What we need to do as governments is to create the conditions for that private investment to flow. Our FTA might help a bit in that.
Right. I'd like to also ask you, before we come to the FTA, about the G20 agenda. Rishi Sunak is going to be there, and this would, in a way, be his first big multilateral meeting where he meets top world leaders. There is a lot of economic turmoil back home in the UK. What is the Prime Minister's priority going to be? What would he like to achieve out of the G20 meetings?
I think you're absolutely right to put it in the context. There is quite a lot of economic turmoil in the developed world. One of the drivers of that is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So a very first obvious point from Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, if we want the world to grow and inflation to drop, Russia, what are you doing in Ukraine? Stop it. Get back to your own borders. Stop invading another country. That will be one message. A second message will be taking it from Sharm last week through to the G20 this week about how we're going to tackle the long-term challenges, how we're going to get support for climate change, how we're going to get support to the most vulnerable in the world, with an eye also to India's own G20 presidency coming up from the 1st of December. And the sense that we, India and the UK together, khas dost, as Prime Minister Johnson said, but we now need to look and see how can we work together in other countries as well. And we're beginning to do, for example, climate work, India and the UK together, in other countries, for example, vulnerable small island states and other parts of the world. So there are these long-term challenges. There's a short-term challenge of Russia and Ukraine. How are we going to work together on them?
Right. Also, speaking about the Russia-Ukraine war, we believe there are at least 10 countries in the G20 who want to use very harsh language against Russia for the war against Ukraine. Probably that's why we may not be able to see an agreement on the final text or the communique. What is your view on how the Russia-Ukraine tensions or the war, the conversation around the war will play out during the summit? And what will be the message from Prime Minister Sunak? Because the Russian president is not coming.
So I understand. The G20 is set against the backdrop of Russia's illegal occupation of Ukraine. That is harming everybody. It's harming food prices in India, fertilizer prices in India. It's causing inflation to lots of countries around the world. So we can see the harm, never mind the human harm, the human terrible cost which is being paid in Ukraine by this. So that has to stop. By the way, Russia's invasion of Ukraine means that some of our development budget is being spent on Ukraine, which we must do to support the humanitarian situation there, but which we'd much rather be spending on long-term challenges like climate change. So the G20 is the collection, the political will of the biggest countries in the world. They're all being harmed by what Russia is doing in Ukraine. So that's the first message. And we need that to end so that we can really effectively solve some of the longer term questions, such as food security, such as climate change.
Also about bilateral meetings during this visit, we believe the Indian Prime Minister will have 8 meetings on the 16th. What about Prime Minister Rishi Sunak? Will he have a meeting with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the sidelines?
We very much hope so. Rishi Sunak took office and within 2 days was speaking on the phone to Prime Minister Narendra Modi to talk about what the UK and India could do more together. We've really tried to transform the relationships in the last 2 years, whether it's on trade, I'm sure we'll come to that, whether it's on defence and security, on investment as well, where India is a big investor in the UK and vice versa, on health as well, the success of the Covishield vaccine, what can we do next? And we want to go further and we want to go faster. And that is what I think, if they meet it, and I hope that they will want to talk about the details. How are we going to turn the fine words into reality?
Right. Speaking about the FTA, there was a lot of excitement. There was a lot of hype that it would be done by Diwali. That has not happened. We believe that there are still several sticking points with the FTA. Are we now starting from scratch now that a new Prime Minister is in office, or we are starting from where Boris Johnson left off?
We're absolutely not starting from scratch. There's a continuity, I think, in the UK's British government's policy towards India, which we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years, and which I think will be continued by Rishi Sunak. Of course, he has the advantage. He knows India extremely well for various reasons, through family reasons and through his heritage and so forth. So the FTA, we've done the long walk through the valley. We've now got up to base camp. And I think not only can we start this steep ascent, we can see the route, as you must to get to the top. And that's a route we have to climb together. Of course, both sides need to get something good out of it. There's always a bit of lena-dena in any negotiation. But we can see what that route is to a great summit at the end. And I think there are advantages for Indian companies in terms of exporting to the UK, in terms of investing to the UK. But also, I think, in terms of the confidence it gives to both countries about our shared economic future. Our economies today are roughly similar size. India's will, we hope, grow very strongly over the next generation or so, but the UK remains a top 10 world economy for many years to come. And at a time of geopolitical tension and rivalry, working better together with your friends. Janet Yellen, I think, was talking about that last week when she was in India. Is going to be ever more important. And there, I think the UK and India do have something special together.
Right. High Commissioner, if I were to ask you about the key issues which still need to be thrashed out, because we believe there are a number of issues which are yet to be decided and cleared out.
That's right, although I think a lot of the groundwork has been done. So what will those issues be? They'll be around the relative lowering of tariffs. India has very high tariffs traditionally, border taxes, the UK has very low ones, but both have products which they'd like to be able to sell more into each other's markets. Then there's a question of services. UK is very open in terms of service economy. India is more closed. Will India open a little bit more? I suspect in return India would say, well, we want a bit more access to work routes for Indian workers to the UK. Not forgetting that, by the way, that almost half of all of our skilled work visas go to Indian nationals today, and India is now overtaking China as supplying the most number of international students to the UK. So there's quite a lot there already, but we can go a bit, we look to go a bit further on that on both sides. Then there's a question which I think is very relevant to your views of investment protection. UK will ask for ensuring that there's proper investment protection for UK investors into India. I think that should be to India's advantage, because India, in order to make this huge economic transformation in the next generation, needs a lot of investment. It's generating a lot of capital internally, but it still needs external capital. The UK is one of the main sources of the world of external capital. So those will be the issues. There'll be tough negotiations. There always are. Even tougher, dare I say it, than a World Cup semi-final. But in the end, I think there's a strategic advantage to both countries in creating the new FTAs. It's interesting, both countries are doing FTAs with Australia, for example, looking to do one with the Gulf. You've already done one with UAE, Canada. So that we are trying to get closer together as a series of economies where we can trust each other to develop a shared future.
How many of the chapters in the FTA negotiations have we managed to agree on? Over
half of them already. And I think now we want to clear a way to get down to the absolute core of chapters which we need to solve, which will be around those issues, around goods, services, some investment protection.
Right. Scotch whisky, tariffs on Scotch whisky, that has been often spoken about in the past. Have we reached a consensus on that?
That will be part of an end game on a series of products, both ways actually, which will, I think, take quite a lot of work. But it's possible to do. Don't forget, we've already done this a little mini deal about 1.5 years ago, where we allowed, for example, access for Indian shrimp into the UK market, British apples into the Indian market. So we've actually made some steps already, both within the FTA and outside as well. For example, we now have an agreement on the mutual recognition of higher degrees, master's qualifications between the UK and India, which had been kicked around for 10 years. So actually, we're getting stuff done between the two governments. We just need to go that bit further now.
Right. By when do you expect an FTA to be signed? Some reports were suggesting March next year. Would you be able to put a timeline? Has the new Prime Minister somehow given a timeline to these talks?
I think we'll be careful not to give specific timelines, but we will give a sense of urgency. I don't understand speed anymore. When I watch Josh Butler do a ramp shot off a 90-mile-an-hour shot, I see speed taking place in different ways than I ever knew before. What I think is a sense of urgency that we need to get on with this now.
My final two questions, High Commissioner. The extradition of Nirav Modi and Vijay Mallya. Now, this is something that has been debated on for a very long time. It's been taken up at the highest level. Where is the extradition of these two individuals, if you had to explain us the status?
Sure. So the British government has ordered the extradition of both those individuals, in the case of Vijay Mallya now almost 2.5 years ago. That's as far as the government can go. Then there are processes through the courts which have to be followed. The courts are obviously independent from the government, and those are going on at the moment. All I would say is the wheels of justice turn slowly, but they do turn. And Prime Minister Boris Johnson, when he was here, made clear that in general we do not want economic fugitives in the United Kingdom. Justice must be done and must be seen to be done. But that is now a matter for the courts.
Right. Is Vijay Mallya's case stuck as a political asylum application?
I would never comment on any question like that. What I would say is the courts, matters are in the courts, and that is for the courts to decide.
Right. Is the UK Prime Minister likely to come to India anytime soon? Any discussions on that?
I think that the two Prime Ministers will meet this week. They've already spoken on the phone. I very much hope that they'll meet again before too long. When that will happen, who is to say? The British Prime Minister's got his hands full. We've got a big economic statement this week, as you were referring to earlier. But I'm quite clear that India will be one of his top international priorities.
On visas, this has been a sticking point between both sides. India has been requesting for more visa slots. On the UK sides, UK has been requesting for opening up of e-visas. Where do things stand? Because we see a lot of long wait times for Indian nationals. Is there an issue of reciprocity also?
The good news is those wait times are dropping very fast. And more importantly, lots of people are getting to the UK. So India is number one for visas for skilled workers, 45%. It's number one for student visas. It's number one for visit visas for the UK. Our waiting times have dropped a lot. The large majority of visas are now dealt with within the 15 working day standard we set ourselves. There is a stock of difficult cases which is reducing every week. I follow the numbers every week. It's reducing and reducing and reducing, which are taking longer than the 15 days. Also, plenty of people are using the 5-day service, the priority visa service. So frankly, we are, I would say, outperforming almost all of our competitors in the speed with which we are dealing with visas. And we very much hope that we can resolve the e-visas question on the Indian side.
Right. High Commissioner, thank you very much for taking out time, telling us about Prime Minister Sunak's COP27 and G20 agenda, and also about the future of India-UK ties as well.
Thank you very much indeed.
All right, that was UK High Commissioner Alex Ellis in conversation with CNBC-TV18, and clearly the G20 is going to be one stormy meeting amid all the geopolitical tensions we're looking at currently. We're heading into a short break. On the other side, we bring you details on India and the Gulf Cooperation Council, who are likely to restart free trade agreement talks in the coming few weeks. We'll be right back with all the news. Welcome back. You're watching News Center. India and the Gulf Cooperation Council, which includes Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, Oman, Kuwait, and Bahrain, are slated to restart free trade agreement talks in 2 to 3 weeks. Remember, after 2 rounds of negotiations held in 2006 and 2008 respectively, the GCC had deferred negotiations. We learned from sources that the aim of the meeting will be to have a fair, equitable and mutually beneficial FTA. Abhimanyu Sharma is here with the details. Abhimanyu, what is on the agenda?
Government sources have told CNBC-TV18 that talks over a possible free trade agreement between India and the Gulf Cooperation Council are slated to restart in 2 to 3 weeks. The existing comprehensive economic partnership agreement with GCC constituent UAE will serve as a benchmark for prospective talks. Sources have said that India's focus will remain on labor-intensive sectors, even as it aims to generate over 1 lakh jobs through a fair, equitable and mutually beneficial FTA. A framework agreement on economic cooperation between India and GCC was signed in August 2004, which provided that both sides should consider ways to extend and liberalize trade relations, as well as initiate discussions on the feasibility of an FTA. After 2 rounds of negotiations held in 2006 and 2008 respectively, GCC had deferred negotiations. On the 31st of October, the Federation of Indian Exporters Organization had told CNBC-TV18 that the FTA talks will possibly be aided by the presence of a customs union amongst GCC, as well as the existing trade ties with its member constituent UAE. The exporters body had said that petroleum and petrochemical trade will be the likely priority in the FTA by the GCC nations, whereas India's likely priority will be goods and services.
And what the US papers are reporting that President Biden now goes to the G20 more confident about his political position after the Democrats have managed to wrest control of the Senate. With that, it is a wrap on this edition of News Center. Don't go anywhere. News continues on CNBC-TV18.